Well, welcome. It's Stuart French from DeltaKnowledge, and with the release of the new ISO standard, I thought I'd just do a quick interview with one of the authors of the standard, Arthur Shelley, and get some of his feedback on how it was developed, what's in it, and how it can be a benefit of you. So Arthur is the founder of Organisational Zoo and has most recently written the book Knowledge Succession. So thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Stuart.
So you've been to Europe, you've been all over the place sort of putting this together, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, the International Standards Organisation is a fascinating place. They don't have expertise in their own structure. They leverage the structure of all of the standards organisations from around the world. So it gets input from many different people from different countries.
Right. So were you the only Australian on the team?
I was the only Australian on the team. What happens is each standards association, like the British Standards Institution, Standards Australia and their equivalents from around the world, all nominate a person to be on a committee.
Mm-hmm.
And not all countries are represented, but any country can be represented if they choose to be.
Right. Gotcha. So why, I mean, we've seen a lot of movement over the years with attempts to do this and different things in different countries. Why is now the right time in the evolution and the story of KM to put forward an international standard?
I think it's a fantastic time because KM has been an emerging discipline for quite some time, and it's quite an eclectic discipline. There are many people with different positions or perspectives of what's right, what's wrong, what knowledge is, etc.
Yeah.
And we've been evolving over a long period of time, and I think we've now got a nice eclectic mix built into what that standard needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. That's certainly been my experience. There's everything from IT input to enterprise architecture to psychology to you name it. There's so many different personalities and different ways of implementing it. So how does this standard differ from previous ones in the past? I mean, we've had the Australian standard, I think in 2005.
Yeah, 2005, AS5037.
Yep.
It's now officially in retirement, but we are going to revive it because it's a different thing to what the international standard is.
Right.
The international standard for KM, AS30401, is a requirement standard, a management system standard based on requirements. So it is able to be audited against.
Right.
The Australian standard was much more sort of comprehensive and flexible. In that there are things that you can sort of measure, but there's a whole bunch of intangible stuff that's in there as well, and that's why it was a guide and not a requirement standard.
Right, got you. So would you call that prescriptive and descriptive? Is that the difference between the two?
Yeah, to a large extent. A requirement standard, you have to be able to measure to say, is that thing there or is it not? And it describes what you need to have in place, right, but not how you do it.
Gotcha.
So it would say there is a requirement for you to have leadership responsibility, or you've got to recognise that knowledge is a tacit intangible thing, but how you recognise that and how you leverage that as an organisation to create value is going to be very different for different sorts of disciplines.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. But you touched on something there about knowledge systems, and of course that's in the title. Mm-hmm. As well, and internationally that probably makes a lot of sense. But in Australia, I find that a lot of management people, specifically if you've got an MBA, tend to think of systems as technology. Yeah. How do you think that's going to go in the Australian environment particularly?
Yeah, look, I think all language carries meaning, right? And different words are interpreted in very different ways across different cultures. And you're right, if you talk to sort of people that come out of sort of Northeast America, it's all about systems thinking, which is the systems as a whole. Fifth discipline type systems thinking, sure, organizational learning. So these sorts of things, and the word system does get the system that we're putting stuff in, like SharePoint or something like that.
Yeah.
But in ISO terms, it's the system as a whole. And if you look at the other systems standards, the management system standards like ISO 9000,
sure,
it looks at how all of the bits connect with each other. So it does incorporate, you know, the culture, the process, the technology, etc. So it's very broad way.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So given that though, if it is prescriptive, how do you handle some of the more intangibles like culture, for example, which are radically different from organisation to organisation, let alone from country to country?
Yeah, and even within the standards committee, there were different opinions as to how much of the warm, fluffy stuff versus the hard, yes, tick the box, I can see that you've got that there was there. Yeah. But, you know, any good standard, any good guideline is going to give you a range, and there'll be a range of opinions. There are some people out there that are knowledge experts that say that this standard is not going to be of any use. And then there is so many more people that it's a big step up from where they are now. Yeah. So, you know, someone who's already been working for decades, they're going to say, oh, well, there's not much in that, I already know it. Yeah, but most people don't. You know, if we're going to mature the discipline as a whole internationally, we've got to give people little steps to take at a time. Yeah. I have no doubt that we'll step further up as we go through.
Yeah. Now, as you know, I've been lecturing on KM at university for a few years, and the one thing that stands out is, you know, accounting has a standard there. I mean, you know, it's very clear, and yet they do a quick search, the new students, you know, a class, and they can't find, there's no standard. So I can't even find an agreement on what knowledge means.
Yeah.
So I can see that making a big difference. But for those who haven't seen the standard, it's been out, I think, a week and a half now or something. Why would they want to download it? Whether you're in government or in private enterprise, what's the next step and what's in it? You've obviously spent a lot of time putting the standard together with the team. What are the key takeaways that you see for people in management around Australia?
I think the key thing, and this is happening with all of the ISO management system standards and standards generally, in that the standards are becoming principles based. So what are the principles that we're trying to implement here? And of course, you know, this is a much deeper level than getting up to basic actions, right? An absolute prescriptive standard of 10 years ago would have said, do this, do this, do this, and not really try to explain the principles of why you're doing these things. So ISO30401, the knowledge management standard, is here are some 8 principles that you're trying to achieve. You know, it's about creating value. It's about, you know, sort of doing more of these things. But how that you then go about that is really up to you, and it's quite different sort of thing. So for someone who's just starting in KM, this is a huge thing to say, what are the key elements that you need to focus on in order to get this thing right? Yeah. So, but for someone who's been around for a long, long time, they're going to say, yeah, but that's so basic. Yeah, but not for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. And I also find that they're sometimes taught the complete opposite, that everything has to be measured, otherwise you can't manage it. And so some of the intangibles like tacit knowledge or some of the skills of a truck driver or something, the ones that can be taught in a classroom, they've got a checkbox for that. But the stuff that they know about, that warehouse, the door's just that little bit, make sure you fold the mirrors in. You'll never find that in a class. But how does the business have to manage that? Because mirrors are expensive, you know?
Yeah, no, that's right. And the thing there is, you know, with a principles-based standard rather than sort of, you know, a specific action-based standard, like an electrical wiring, you want to know exactly, you know, where the green and the red and the brown wires go, right? Yeah. And even then, different coloured wires were used in different countries in the past. Now that there's an international standard for these things, we have a safer society, because everything is done, you know, in as close to the same way as possible. And this is what we're trying to do with KM. Of course, there's a bazillion ways that you can do KM, and that's appropriate because there are many different contexts. You don't want to just stamp out a formula or a process to do it the same. However, if you build in the 8 principles and you look at, you know, the elements that are in the standard and think about this, have something in place for that. Yeah. You know, that's huge. And where does someone who's just starting in these things get the advice? The other thing that's happened is in 2015, ISO included a requirement for knowledge management in the 9000 standard.
And that just become relevant this month, right? Or last month, I think.
Yeah, correct.
Compliance is now required
That is
for the 2015 standard.
That's right. And people were saying, well, okay, you put this requirement, but what do I do? Do I go and read this person's book or that person's book? And knowledge managers all disagree with each other. So what do I do?
Right.
You know, and for the knowledge profession, it's time we started to get our act together and say, look, there are some common things that everyone should do. And that's what the standard represents. And of course, there are other ways of doing it. And you can have all of those opinions of those experts and gurus out there for that. And they're all valid.
Yeah.
That's the point. They are all valid. But what is the common thread that brings it all together? That's what we'll put in the standard. Make sure these things are covered. Then go and talk to your experts to find out what's the best way for you to cover them within your context.
Fantastic. 30 seconds to go. So let me ask you quickly, because alongside the standard right now is we're looking at an international society of knowledge professionals. Where's that up to quickly, and how soon before you think that'll be launching around the world?
48 hours. Yeah, it's very close and deliberately timed around the standard as well.
Yep.
And of course, we're running the AusKM National Conference next week. So all of these things are coming together. The KMGN is being hosted here. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the international knowledge professionals together so that we can act as a collaborative society to actually implement what we preach. You know, I mean, we can all sit around and argue forever about, you know, what's wrong with somebody else's opinion, or we can all get together and say, you know what, this is really valuable stuff. This is the stuff that is most helpful to other people. And that's why we're doing it now. But we're also building this international knowledge professional society as a group of people for the newbie to start to say, look, I've read the standard, but I don't understand it, as a place to go to get some consistent advice.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well,
It
thank
is.
you so much. I know you played a big part in that as well. We really appreciate all the effort you put in. I know it's hard to get a hold of you because you're always on planes flying backwards and forwards, and I appreciate your time to explain the basics of this, and hopefully we'll see some uptake and lots more asking of questions in the management community.
Absolutely, and that's what we want. We want people to be aware and know how to apply and to ask the right questions of the right people. And if we get that, you know, the whole world is a better place. I mean, quite literally, you know, look at what happened after ISO 9000. Everyone criticised it and bagged it and whatever. And for a couple of years, it was really, really difficult. But now, where would we be if we didn't have consistent quality around the world? Yeah. Imagine a world where we're consistently implementing principles of KM for making better, more strategic decisions in a better way. Can't get any better than that.
Great. Arthur, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've had Arthur Shelley from Intelligent Answers. He's literally been a stalwart in both the Australian and also the international KM communities. And it's great to hear his take on the new KM standard. Jump on the ISO website and you can download it right now. Thanks very much for listening.